So good evening to everyone that has joined us, and we've reached the 6 o'clock hour here in the States. And Irit Burkeman, who is in London, has reached the 11 o'clock hour, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm glad you all joined us. And I know more people will be joining as we get going this evening, because it is kind of dinner hour and daylight, as I said earlier, so it doesn't feel quite like evening. And so spring is getting here, at least through the day visits of the sun. So that's a positive. And thank you to everyone for being here and joining the presentation series of Temple Israel as we add to our repertoire of speakers. And this will be a very interesting program. I'll introduce Irit in a couple minutes, but we get to do some deeper analysis into through art and through poetry, some pieces of Torah that Irit's going to speak to us about. And I can just say on my own that I know that this must be a very popular topic, or there wouldn't be so much art and sculpture about it. We are obviously, a lot of artists and people have felt the creative desire to express some of these scenes in ways that allow us to imagine more fully, or their imaginations more fully, because we have no video on board from the time of biblical studies. Although Professor Spar would certainly tell us that something in cuneiform, or if it was chiseled in a rock or something like that, then we probably have pictures and we could interpret it in a more full way. But we have our archaeological reflections, but we don't have too many visual reflections other than that. And we're not going to do any archaeological digs. Tonight we're going to do some more literary and visual digs into our program. And we'll look for everyone's participation. This is going to be interactive, so everyone who is here, we look forward to having you join us. So it should be a very interesting program that Irit is here to talk about. So speaking of Irit, let me introduce a little more formally. Born and raised in Israel, Irit studied literature at Bar Ilan in Tel Aviv. She received an MA in Hebrew and Jewish Studies from Leo Baeck College in London and served on their faculty for many years. Now living in London, she's presented her workshops in England, Germany, and the US. And we're delighted that she's here to present a workshop tonight. And as I said, that will be something that we are going to all participate in. And as more people join us, we're looking for everyone's participation. So let me introduce Irit and say welcome. And you can share with us how you'd like this evening to go as more people join us and participate. So Irit from London, welcome.
Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. Thank you to the organizers and to my friend Rabbi Gloria for inviting me to share two of my passions with you. Apologies for reading this short introduction, but as some of you might know, I'm in London, UK, where the time is 11 p.m. So just to be on the safe side, I'm reading. Don't worry, my friends call me a night owl. This is a workshop, which means that we are going to go through the material together. On this occasion, your participation is crucial, as you don't want me to fall asleep while waiting for a response. Can you all please put your names on your screens? I think that most of you have done it, so I won't bother with that. Because if I don't have the name, it makes the exchanges very difficult. And the last thing, it would be great if you could raise your electronic hand up when you'd like to speak. Then Bob will call, once Bob calls your name, unmute yourself. And the last thing, if you're more comfortable putting your comments or questions in the chat, please do so, and Bob will monitor this. Okay, so enough with the housekeeping. I love poetry and I love art. And so I found a way to marry them together. We get poems by stringing words into text, and we use paint and tools to create a painting or a piece of art. Recently, I heard Professor Mark Michael Epstein refer to a painting as a visual text, which gives more credibility to my wish to place painting side by side with poems and see what will ensue. I assume most of us are familiar to a greater or lesser degree with biblical stories, so some of them will be the topic of our workshop today. So that we are all on the same page, I will briefly summarize a couple of the stories we will be dealing with. I would like to share my process with you. When I look at art, it sometimes reminds me of a poem, so I try to find the relevant poem to match with a painting. Sometimes, however, a poem creates an image in my mind, and then I look for a painting that will echo my sentiments. Like the artists or poets who were inspired by the stories to put them to paper or brush to canvas, to put pen to paper or brush to canvas, we will use their interpretation to see if it sheds a new light on our understanding of the stories or challenge our understanding. Please note that all the poems are Hebrew poems, and what you have in front of you are the English, or what you will have in front of you are the English translations. Unfortunately, I couldn't fit the Hebrew text in the slides. So if anyone is interested, I can read the Hebrew to you, and there will be a handout available as well later. I have translated 3 of the poems, trying to preserve the flavor of the Hebrew, while 2 have been translated by well-known poets. So let's see what transpires from putting art and poetry together. I have done my work by bringing the material to your attention. Now it's your turn to help me. And now let's see if technology works. Bear with me for a second. And there we go. Oh, that wasn't the idea. Okay. Well, yeah, but you can see everything around. Okay. So I call the session The Bible Through Art and Poetry, because that's what we will be doing. And the first thing we'll be dealing with is the book, because as some of you might know, the Bible is sometimes referred to as the book of books. So it's only right that we should start with it. And the painting that I've chosen is by Vincent van Gogh, and it's called sometimes Still Life with Bible or the Open Bible.
Irit, your PowerPoint is not on our screen at this time.
Aha.
You're gonna have to go back to your
Hold
technology.
on, I might have forgotten to share the screen. Hold
That's
on. Okay, I'm giving you a preview.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go back to Zoom. No. There we go. Share screen. Okay. I'll try again.
Bottom right, you're going to share.
I did the press share. Okay. It's a good job my tech advisor is with me.
All right, you were successful now.
Okay. Is that better?
Excellent.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so as I said, this is the first slide, and I would love it if somebody would like to read the poem by Asher Reich. Thank you.
Rabbi Gloria, why don't you try the first one?
When I recently moved apartment, my forgotten Tanakh was suddenly found. A bar mitzvah present, the only thing I took with me when I deserted my childhood home before the 40 desert years. I leafed through the book. Some pages got stuck to each other as if in a concealed secret. Cain obviously still murders his brother. On every murder, 2 other brothers grow in the field. Goliath is removing his armament and stops for lunch. From his eternal fight with the little Israel, stops for lunch from his eternal fight with the little Israeli. The Philistine head is already adorned in rubber bullets. like the curls of a black man. The first astronaut, Elijah, routinely goes up into the sky in a storm. Israeli unidentified flying objects float in Ezekiel's sky. I continued to leaf. The pages have blackened already from bloody wars that continue from within. Only the sins remain like white stains. Prophets disappeared from the book to prophecies far away outside it. Kings escaped to exile. Angels flew back to the caves in the sky to look for God's dried bones.
Thank you. I'll give you a couple of seconds to digest this. And I'll tell you that when I looked at the Van Gogh painting, I've discovered that it's supposed to depict a gold-leafed family Bible, and it's opened on Isaiah 53. I'd love to know how they found it, because even enlarging the picture, I couldn't see anything like that. And the small tattered copy by the side is the French Joie de Vivre by Émile Zola. So you've got the two side by side. Can anybody share with us what your first impressions are of either or both?
Free to unmute yourself if you would like to speak.
I'll have a quick shot at it. What I see with the open Bible is the story of our people, and what we see in the small version is the fact that the joy of life really is put into in many, many more words and stories into the Bible itself.
Nice.
Thanks, Bob.
I notice in the painting is the candle is not lit, and the light is a natural light that's shining from behind the viewer onto the open book and the closed book. So that makes me think in terms of when we talk about light as a metaphor for understanding.
Nice. So the reason that I've put those two together is the poem, I could spend 2 hours, if not more, on going through the poem. The middle bit of the poem is talking obviously about the situation today, but also the repetition that we have of the cycle of reading the Torah, when it says that Cain still killing his brother. Why of all the stories in the Bible to choose this one, to me obviously ties up with the following stanza about the eternal fight between the Israelis and the Palestinians. But what really appealed to me was the idea that the Bible was forgotten somewhere in his flat, and obviously forgotten and misplaced. He couldn't find it. And suddenly when he moved house and he packed everything, he found it. And, you know, lots of kids wait for the bar mitzvah for their presents and everything. And what he found, the only thing that he took with him was his Bible. And he's saying that when I deserted, and the word he's using in Hebrew is the word that is used for deserting from the army usually. And he's bringing in the 40 years of the desert. And again, we know when he's talking about it, he's leafing through the book and the pages are stuck together. And when I look at the book of the painting of Van Gogh, the pages are not defined. The text it's not clear. As I said, I couldn't see that it was Ezekiel 53, Isaiah 53, sorry. So therefore I found like an echo between the two. And the one thing that I also like, he's saying about in the poem that the pages were stuck like a secret. And at the end of each academic year in school, we used to fold the page of a, we call it memory book like that. And we used to write secrets inside. And that was the Sod Camus, the sort of this secret. And again, looking at the painting, to me, it was quite secretive because I can't see really what it says on it. I couldn't decipher that it was an Emile Zola book either. So it was the reason why I put the two together. And of course, the Bible is open supposedly on one of the prophets, and the reference at the end of the poem about the dry bones, which obviously resonates with us with the vision of the dry bones in Yechezkel 37. Anybody has anything to say about this?
I think also the idea that he couldn't find it, but when he found it, it was still there, and there were still, nothing had changed. You know, there were still things to read, there were still things to learn from. I love the image of Elijah going up in the sky in a storm, Israeli unidentified flying objects. I mean, there's one theory that he really saw he really saw a UFO.
Yeah.
And that informed his vision, but that no matter when we come back to it, it's there for us, it's meaningful, and there's something to learn. I don't remember the contents of the Emile Zola book, but the difference in size between the Bible and the Joy of Life, is interesting. That would be juxtaposed that way.
What I like as well is it's supposed to be gold leaf, and the color of the joie de vivre is also sort of goldish color.
Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't sort of start dealing with the Bible without talking about the book. So, as I say, in all the good books, we have to start at the beginning. And I found this painting by Ivan Ivazovsky, and please forgive me if I mispronounced his name. And the poem is by Rivka Miriam. And again, if somebody would like to read it for us, it would be wonderful.
Bob Dwork, are you available?
I'm on it. In the beginning, God created the heavens that really are not, and the earth that warms to touch them. In the beginning, God created threads stretching between them, between the heavens that really are not, and the earth crying out. And the man he created, the man who is a prayer and a thread, touches that which is not with a touch of softness and light.
Thank you. I realized that sometimes the translation doesn't read very well, but it's exact translation of the Hebrew, which is a bit, I think it reflects a bit the tohu vavohu, the chaos that existed then. Anything that strikes anybody?
So, hi, I don't know if everybody here knows one another, but I don't know anyone.
Welcome,
We're
Deborah.
in the same boat.
Okay, well, hello, everyone. So I'm Deborah. So the poem is without touching and without close adherence. anything to anything. Everyone is on a thread. And yet the painting, and I'd appreciate it if you would spell the painter later, spell the name. But the
Okay.
painting is very strong. And I don't feel that lightness, that lack of connectivity in the painting that I do in the poem.
Interesting. I suppose I'm too doctrinated with the idea of the tohu and the chaos and the things sort of mixed all together, because when I look at the painting, I saw this, as I said, chaos, and the rays of light look to me like the threads. But it's wonderful. I mean, that's the beauty of looking at things like that together, because people see different things. And I love that, because we all have our own take on things, which is great.
I wouldn't disagree that there's chaos in the painting, but it's maybe this is these two words don't go together, but it's powerful. It's powerful chaos.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also see the light trying to break through the darkness in the painting.
Mhm.
This is Mickey speaking. What I get from the poem is yearning, this desire, this the earth crying out, the earth that wants to touch. And yet, when they talk about, humankind, it's with softness and light. And I see this yearning and reaching in the picture, in the painting, this yearning for the earth to connect with the heavens.
Mhm. Nice. And
Of what is and what is not, because the word not is repeated multiple times. And I guess see the artist or the poet struggling with what is real and what is not. And perhaps the struggle of how these things, are these things really real? Or how did they become to be real? Because God brings the creation idea by verbal creation. It's not some physical act or someone else produced it, and God said. And then we see these things in the creation that the poet talks about that are not. So there's some skepticism in this poem as to what is and what is not.
okay, thank you.
In this painting, I see a reflection of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling of God creating man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's really interesting because I've been looking at this painting for quite a while, as you can imagine, and I was not quite clear in my mind what this bit was. And I thought when I looked about the poem, and it said that the earth was crying out, and I don't know, it suddenly looked to me as if it was a bit of like a volcano erupting, and the flames sort of reaching up to the sky. And while we wait for other comments, I'll just tell you that actually the poem says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim, and then ve'et ha'adama. But in the Bible, it's Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. So it's used the earth in the Bible, and here it's using Adama, which is the sort of the material of the earth, and we are called, Adam was made from the Adama, and we say that we return to the Adama as opposed to the Aretz, which seems to be harsher. The Adama seems to be a bit sort of warmer. Any
Irit,
other
could you
comments?
share again the first lines in Hebrew of the poem?
Bereshit ברא אלוהים את השמיים שבעצם אינם, ואת האדמה שרוצה בם לגעת.
Thank you.
And in the poem, they're talking about the touch, the softness of the light. And I feel that there's sort of, in this whole area here, there's somehow softness. I don't know if it's the softness of the clouds. I don't know if clouds were created by then, but it's sort of, I get that feeling of the softness. And the prayer and the thread that is touching or not touching, and is sort of hints at some sort of a relationship that exists, which I think bodes well for the future.
What do you think the poet means by the heavens really or not, that really or not?
I think it's just part of this chaos, that things weren't formed then, so they were and they weren't. It's part of this tov vavo, this all mishmash of whatever it was there. And there's the bit here, the picture looks like waves of the sea, but then what are these? Which reflects the clouds above. So it's all, there's no clear definition of what things are, which is, when I read the first verses of Genesis 1, this is what I see, this sort of all, we've got a beautiful word in Hebrew, balagan, which is all, everything is mixed together and disorganized and that sort of thing.
Scientists call that kind of concept chaos. And from chaos comes what, right?
Yeah.
Well, except they're finding now that behind the chaos, there's order.
And we've got the threads, and the
Yeah,
threads give
yeah.
some order to things because they touch or connect, make connection between different things. But also when you put a thread between one thing and another, you create some tension as well. So there's tension as well in the poem.
I'm hesitate to say this, but until we get to the last 4 lines, and the man he created, the man who is a prayer and a thread.
Mm-hmm.
So man is, it's not strong. He touches that which is, he touches that which is not.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me that everything is not, except man prays that it is. So if in the beginning, God created threads stretching between them, but they're not. So there's so much not. Is it possible that God tried to make these things and they're not really real, and that man hopes that they are?
Possibly. I forgot to say in my introduction that in my book, no interpretation is wrong interpretation. So you don't need to worry about saying anything, because different things evoke different things in all of us. So that's absolutely fine. And yes, the only thing that is really concrete there, except for the threads that are stretching, but we don't know exactly what are those threads. Are they ropes? Are they, sewing threads? Are they embroidery thread? We don't have any clue about it. But when he says he created the man, we all have a picture of what a man is. you know, the eyes, the arms, the legs, that sort of thing. So it's the only thing that is really concrete in this poem that was created. The rest is a bit, I hasten to say, airy-fairy, but it's not clear, not definite.
I think the threads are spiritual threads
Right.
as opposed
Could
to
be.
physical threads.
For sure. And we've got the prayer. And when we pray, we actually pray to something that we've got no real idea of what that entity looks like or is or anything, yet we do pray to that unknown entity.
Irit, is the man both a prayer and a thread?
That's the question. Yeah, that's really smart because, and the man he created, the man who is a prayer, is the thread go back to the man?
Is there a
Yeah.
comma
Go
there in
back to
the
the
Hebrew?
prayer? I think
Yeah,
that's really
it just
smart.
says that the man is the prayer and he or it is the thread and it touches what there isn't.
He touches.
Yeah.
He is a prayer and a thread.
The man is, yeah.
The man is, okay.
Mhm.
It's not clear in the English.
No, it's not clear in the Hebrew either. Well,
Which-
because you can say Haishu tefillah vehu chut. So you can think that the man is the thread or the who can relate to something else. Because she's not saying Haishu tefillah vechut. If it said that, then it would have been clear. Putting the extra he or it, that's why I said he or it, it's not entirely clear. It's open to our interpretation.
Before we leave this, could you give the artist's name again? I'm sorry to ask.
Yeah, the artist's name is Ivan Aivazovsky. Aivazovsky.
Thank you.
Pleasure. I was very pleased when I discovered this painting. It really evoked something in me. Okay, anything else about this one?
Only
If
thing
not-
that the only thing that's touching, that's actually touching is the man. And touching with a touch of softness and light. It's just, I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but it's interesting. God isn't touching.
No, and there's the stretching, but it doesn't specify the touching. And that's why, but it's not only touching, but maga is sort of what you feel when you touch something. So that's why I said there's a hint of a relationship to me, because the softness and it makes it all very, I won't say loving, but there's the hint of strong liking or something in it. And that's why to me, it's a hint of a relationship. Okay. Now I'm taking a very big breath when we come to the next one, which is the Binding of Isaac, which is actually one of the stories that I personally struggle with, as Gloria knows. And I found a poem that really means a lot to me by Chaim Guri. And I couldn't find only one painting to put with it. So you have to excuse me, but I put one by Rembrandt and one by Caravaggio. And again, if somebody would like to read the poem, please.
Deborah, would you like to give it a shot? Deborah, would you like to read the poem? I don't know if you can hear me. Okay. Nancy, what about you? Would you read it?
Sure. The ram came last of all, and Abraham did not know that it came to answer the boy's question, first of his strength when his day was on the wane. The old man raised his head, seeing that it was no dream and that the angel stood there. The knife slipped from his hand. The boy, released from his bonds, saw his father's back. Isaac, as the story goes, was not sacrificed. He lived for many years, saw what pleasure had to offer until his eyesight dimmed. But he bequeathed that hour to his offspring. They are born with a knife in their hearts. Wow.
Thank you. The title of the poem is not The Binding of Isaac, but it's Heritage, which I think is telling and ties in with the last line. Anything that grabs you when you see when you read the poem, when you see the paintings?
I'm struck by the fact that he must not have had a relationship with his father, because it seems like they were bequeathed this knife in their hearts. There was, whether he was angry with his father to ever have considered sacrificing him, and he passed that down to his children. But there seems to be the heritage of anger in how this transpired.
Okay.
And it seems that we switch from love of a parent to fear and possibly hate, with the thought that somebody you respect and love and cherish could want to harm you.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, in the end, Isaac, maybe I have my my stories wrong, but does Isaac go to bury Abraham, or am I in the wrong generations? What I'm trying to say is I'm not sure that hatred lasts. So this story, no, I'm sorry. So I just messed up. It's Isaac's kids we're talking about. So
Yeah.
that would be Jacob. And so everything I just said is useless. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Not
We all
useless.
have
just
to
not a
try
perfect.
things out.
I got my generations confused.
No, but Isaac and Ishmael did go to bury Abraham together. So
I
you're not
I
wrong in
thought
that.
that's what, yeah. So maybe I'm not wrong.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
But they don't appear, Isaac and Abraham don't appear together in the Bible after this, until Isaac and Ishmael are standing there at Abraham's grave. What just struck me, reading this time, he lived for many years. He saw what pleasure had to offer until his eyesight dimmed. He didn't experience what pleasure had to offer. He saw what pleasure had to offer until his eyesight dimmed. And at the end of his life, he couldn't see very well. I mean, that the Bible says, but
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the two paintings, the one by Caravaggio being much more dramatic with the facial expressions,
Mhm.
you could see Isaac's reaction, which you can't see in the Rembrandt. It's very powerful.
Mhm. I'm also very struck by the way he's holding Isaac. It's sort of really sort of pinning him down, which is almost sort of cruel. In the Caravaggio one, he's got his hand sort of like around, almost around his neck. It's sort of on his like cheek. And in the Rembrandt one, he's hiding his face totally. And in the poem, when you've got about the seeing, it's very, I find it very powerful how a father can be like that.
These are Renaissance painters who obviously inherit the story, and the story of the possibility of child sacrifice was one of great angst and upset. And we see that in the poem, that this anger, that the possibility of his father killing his son left an indelible mark in his heart. And the painters express what hundreds of years of thought and Bible study had come before, as that still that there's a sentiment that the possibility of child sacrifice, the sacrifice to Molech, if I'm not mistaken, was supposedly real at the time. And this was a traumatic event, and the poem reflects that.
For sure. And when you think that Abraham waited all these years to have a son, and then he's happy or not to sacrifice him. But there's certainly, it's not, let's say, it's not the best sort of a relationship between the two of them, certainly not at this juncture. And, you know, when he's in the poem, when he's lifting his head and he's saying that he wasn't dreaming. Now, what wasn't a dream? That he saw the angel there, or that the ram was there, or was there something else that we don't know about? So what's the dream all about? And I'm really struck by the fact that when the child, he is referred to all the time as a child, when he was released from his bonds, he saw his father's back. Now, some people say, well, maybe he saw his father's back because Abraham didn't want him to see how upset he was or how relieved he was or whatever. To me, you've just had, your son had a miraculous escape. Wouldn't you just hug your son? You'd still have your back turned to him. I find that very sort of powerful image. And the last thing to say on that is that hour that he bequeathed to his offsprings, and they're born with the ma'achelet, with a knife, and it's a very specific knife that is used for sacrifices. It's not any old knife. It's a knife, and the term in Hebrew is ma'achelet. It's got this the root of food or eating in it. It's an all-consuming sort of knife. So he was very lucky to escape it. And looking at it again and again and again, I suddenly understood what it means to be born with that knife in their heart. And I think it's some sort of manifestation of post-traumatic stress disorder. And if I'm thinking of the Holocaust and what the second generations are going through and what the third generations are now going through. And that, to me, is what we have bequeathed by this trauma that Isaac went through.
His
So-
father turned his back on his son is emphasized, as Rabbi Gloria tells us, that they did not speak again, or in the Bible does not talk about them ever speaking again.
Yeah.
And the Bible, as we know, is a compilation of stories of those people who felt what was important they wanted to put down leave in some reflection, some written reflection. And there was no group or philosophy or effort to show that there was a relationship again with his father.
No,
It's-
and it's what the poet picks up
Yes.
from the story and introduces us to it.
Irit,
Yeah.
something struck me. The boy released from his bond saw his father's back. It reminded me of Moses
Saying
on
God,
the mountain. No one can see God's face and live. You know, God tells
Oh.
Moses, you can only see my back.
Mhm.
What would he have, would his life have been different after the life we don't know about if he had seen his father's face? And the other thing that struck me about the painting, and I don't remember which one is which, Rembrandt's and Caravaggio, where he's holding his face, his
Yeah.
hand over the face, he's holding it out almost like he's going to shaft him across across the throat.
Yeah. And the machelet, the knife, falls from his hand. It's sort of, in the other one, he's still holding on to the knife really strongly, he's not letting go. Where in the other one, in the poem, he says the knife dropped, but actually in both cases, it's the angel that is holding and stopping him physically from doing it. Any other comments on?
I guess I'm taken by the fact that after this miracle, there's no joy. The
Yeah.
miracle of saving a life, there is no joy, that celebration. There's no sacrifice of well-being. There's no bench and go mill. There's nothing that says that you've lived. As you said, his firstborn survives, but we never hear about this. So there's some chasm of emptiness that existed and followed through with this feeling of the knife in his heart.
Yeah, but that's again one of the things that I love about the Bible, is that it's giving us a lot of options to put our thoughts into it, because it uses very few words, and the poet is taking that and doing something with it. Okay, if there's no other comments, we'll go on to the next one. And while the binding of Isaac, as I said, is one of those that always bothered me, the Jacob and the angel, I brought you a photo of a statue by Jacob Epstein, which I've seen in the Tate Gallery in London, and I've seen it years ago, and it's still very vivid to me. And just so that we are all in the picture, Jacob, having left Laban, his father-in-law, he's on his way to Canaan now. And on his way, he's planning to make peace with his brother Esau. But if you remember, the relationship weren't so brilliant there. And the episode that we are actually dealing with is on the way to meet to Canaan, and he's sending his family and his possession away, just in case Esau is not feeling very kindly towards him. And then he sees the man, he is left by himself, and then he sees the man and they fight. And the Bible doesn't tell us who the man is. And later on, there's the interpretation that the man was actually God's messenger, the malach, the angel, because Jacob ends up limping as a result. And also there's the blessing and the change of the name. So again, if somebody would like to read the poem for us, please.
Is Marty available to read?
I'll read for him. In the early morning, listen, there are many things he does for me if I'm called on. We also can't share mics because we're in the same room. There'd be too much feedback.
All right.
In the early morning, she sighed and grabbed him so and won against him. And he caught her so and won against her. And they both knew that being caught brings death. And they gave up on saying the name to each other. But at dawn's first light, he saw her body that remained white in the places where her swimming suit covered yesterday. Later, she was suddenly called from above twice, like they call a girl playing in the yard. And she knew her name and allowed her to walk, and he knew her name and allowed her to walk. Very interesting.
Okay. Anything?
You know, whenever I think of this story with Jacob and the angel, I never think of this sturdiness that's in the sculpture. The body is so heavy, the bodies are so heavy and so grounded. It seems to me that it's very much, although his arms is, well, the arm that we see is hanging loosely. That's the only piece that I see of any kind of lightness. I was just surprised to see how sturdy and grounded this piece is.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, it was a fight at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I see how powerless the human is against the angel. This is a fantastic work of sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an unusual interpretation of this subject. It's really something.
I find both interpretation very unusual. The poem and the sculpture. Anything?
It's too bad we can't see the other side. We can see, we can see the eyes and,
It's, yeah.
But we can't see the face of the Jacob.
No, it's somehow, it's quite hidden by the angel. I tried to take photos of it myself, and well, you can't because it's quite a tall statue. But the arms on both sides are quite loose.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have Yehuda Amichai as a contemporary poet brings to it some contemporary pieces. A swimming suit? Where does that come from?
Well, if you look at the poem, if you didn't know the title of the poem, would you see anything about Jacob and the struggle with the angel?
Not necessarily, no.
Not necessarily, or no?
No.
I think it's a definite no in this case.
Right. It's about struggle.
Sorry, two people were talking at the same time. I couldn't hear.
I said it seems to be about a struggle for sure. And this connection with being called by God after the end of this struggle is what I can take from it, but I would not know it was about Jacob.
There's something very sensual about that sculpture.
Yeah. Which is why I like the poem. And also the way the angel is, I mean, they had a struggle, they fought with each other. But the angel is actually holding Jacob up. And there seemed to be some warmth and there's a feeling there in the way he's holding him. He's not holding him, you know, like that. There's softness in it, which is why I think this love poem by Yehuda Amichai, that again, without knowing the title, I like to put the two together, because it's intimate, but there's a fight because she caught him and she won, and then he caught her and he won. So, and you don't know who caught whom, and this sort of catching each other can bring death. And if you fight with an angel, you risk your life. Although again, I'm always intrigued by the fact that in the story, the angel is always referred to as a man and not an angel.
And the sculpture, the fact that the angel is almost tenderly holding up Jacob after a very, very long fight.
Yeah.
Just shows that there is respect for the fact he put up such a good fight. He wasn't quite his match, but pretty much almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the word that I was missing, the tenderness that he's holding him.
Why is it important, the word twice? It's very confusing in the end. Later, she was suddenly called from above. What? So twice? And what? She was called by what? By God from above? What, to stop?
Well,
Bible, God frequently calls to people, and he has to do it twice before he gets an answer. You know, here I am.
Okay.
Yes, but actually the image that Yehuda Amichai has created here, it used to be, I don't think it exists so much anymore, but in Israel, we used to play out in the streets.
Right.
And when you had to go up for lunch or whatever, your parents or your mother, whoever would call you, and they would never call you once because you wouldn't hear, because you were too busy playing and things. So they would call twice. And, you know, from the balconies in the flats, they used to call. So that's why the above as well as obviously we know because of the title that there's something else going on. It's he's depicting that sort of game, because the girl playing in the yard, and when he said, and he knew her name and he allowed her to walk, there's a very popular song that is sung in a lot of the memorial days in Israel, and the song is, he didn't know her name, but he always recognized her hair from the back. And in that song, he is a wounded soldier and she is a nurse. So in fact, he eventually dies and she remains. And here it's sort of the opposite of this, because he knew the name and he let her go. And so she's the one that is going, where in the other poem, it's him that is going. But that's just sort of an association. And it's a very sensual, not so tender encounter in the poem, whereas the statue, to my mind, is very tender.
I just want to add that it's not only in Israel that you play outside and your mother has to call you twice.
Okay.
That first, when I saw this, when I first read it, like they call a girl playing in the yard, that was my first image.
Right.
My mother calling from the apartment house window, usually with a whistle, and then somebody would say, "Deborah, it's your mother, she's whistling."
Yeah. Yeah. We still have a family whistle from those days.
Uh-huh.
Right. If there's nothing else, we've got to, I didn't pay attention to the time, I'm sorry, but I've got to share this poem with you. Sorry, that's I don't know, in English it's Sisera's mother, but the name is Sisera. And Sisera's mother actually appears only once, and it is in Deborah's poem. And Deborah was a prophetess and a judge at the time of Yavin, a Canaanite king. And the fight took place between the Israelite and the Canaanites army, headed by Barak and Sisera. Barak was the Israelite one, and Sisera was the Canaanite. And under Deborah's guidance, Barak defeated Sisera's army, and Sisera escaped to Yael's tent. Yael was an ally, or he thought she was an ally, and Yael gave him milk to drink, and then she killed him with the tent peg. And Deborah and Barak sang a song glorifying their fight and their victory. And Deborah is mentioning Sisera's mother towards the end of the poem. And that's the only time, the only place that Sisera's mother is mentioned. And the painting is by Albert Joseph Moore. And again, would somebody like to read it, please?
I'd be happy to read it.
Please.
Years ago, at the end of Deborah's song, I heard the silence of Sisera's chariot delayed arrival. I watched Sisera's mother's reflection captured in the window, a woman with silver streak in her hair. A spoil of multicolored embroideries, 2 for the neck of each despoiler. This is what Maiden saw. That very hour when he lay in the tent as if asleep, his hands were very empty. On his chin, traces of milk, butter, and blood. The silence was not broken by the horses and chariots. The maidens, too, fell silent one by one. After a while, the sun went down. After a while, the twilight's glow was extinguished. For 40 years, the land was peaceful. For 40 years, no horses galloped. His dead horseman didn't peer through glassy eyes, but she died soon after her son's death. I am Groot.
Thank you. Any comments? Any first impressions of either poem or painting?
I just have a comment about the painting.
Mm-hmm.
So this painting, very unlike the Binding of Isaacs, the Akeda ones, which also used light so powerfully. So this uses light powerfully also, but this has incredible texture. So as a painter, I'm fascinated by the texture in the hair. So intricate and detailed. And the texture in the beads and his little amulet or whatever is hanging from her. And in that whole necklace,
Mm.
that's the first thing I see about the painting, beside the use of light.
Yeah.
You have to feel so sorry for her.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think we usually, think it's the enemy's mother.
Right.
But I think there's the empathy here with the mother for sure. Sorry?
Oh, she looks so young. I don't know. I don't know how old Cicero was, but she looks like a very young mother. I don't know why.
Mm.
Yeah, but she is very beautiful. It's a very beautiful painting. Very, yeah, very beautiful.
Apparently, the model was Fanny Eaton, and she was Jamaican born.
Mhm.
And a lot of painters at that time used her. Anything about the title of the poem? To me, the title is because it says his mother, and when we look at it, we don't know whose mother he's talking about. So to me, it makes it very a universal mother, and not just Sisra's mother, as we find out from the poem. And looking, when I saw, actually my husband found out about the model, and when I thought that she was Jamaican born, I thought that her face looks quite light, her hand looks dark, the color, and the hair has got sort of, as I think Deborah mentioned, this texture and everything, which to me doesn't put the woman in any particular area. She can be anybody's, from any background, the mother. So to me that ties in with the title.
I see something a little different.
Go on.
This was a period of time when there's so-called orientalizing in painting, where the quote unquote exotic is taken up. So you have this young woman who's a little hard to place with this interesting necklace. The bottom pendant actually is an Egyptian pendant, the triangular part. And it could be that he wanted to paint this young woman this way and chose because it gives it a respectable biblical title rather than a portrait of a very interesting young woman with exotic jewelry.
Okay. But the fact that there's the depiction of the jewelry, and there's certainly reference to the jewelry and the embroidery and everything in the poem. So again, that's the poem and the art side by side. And in theory, on the surface, there's no connection between the two of them, but it brings it up. And it's also mentioned in the Bible, the colors and the embroidery. So the painters also picked up on that.
What about the fact that the Twilights has a plural possessive? Why does it mean all twilights of all time and not just this particular one? Wouldn't the possessive be after the T if it was once?
It's obviously relates to that one particular time, but the way that the poem is after a while can put it in different times. So it talks about a particular incident, but it can be taken into other incidents. And you know, in the poem, there's the streak of silver, and the light that reflects in her hair sort of looks a little bit silvery as well. And there's the difference in the eyes and the look, the way that she's looking out of the window, which again, I think is quite a universal thing. I remember my mother-in-law looking out of the window when we were coming in late, you know, sort of the curtain would move a little bit and we know that she was waiting there. And then when we have the description of the horseman, with the glass eye, and there's sort of the difference side by side is quite striking, I think.
White Anglo-Saxon, Protestant or something. White Anglo-Saxon.
I'm not sure if somebody's trying to say something because I can't really hear it. Did somebody say anything?
No, I don't think anyone was trying to answer you.
Okay.
Irit,
All right. Yeah.
what struck me about the title,
Yeah.
we always read about the main characters, Sisera and Barak.
Mm-hmm.
We don't, and I think entitling this His Mother, it opens up as the poem does it, as Deborah's, you know, the Shirat Dvorah does at the end with this incredible description of her waiting. You know, that there are whenever something of consequence happens, there are other people involved.
Of course. Yeah. And we shouldn't forget about it. And I need to find out if there's anything else about his mother, because I sort of, I'm very struck by the fact that Dvorah is using those few lines about her, when in fact she's got nothing to do with the story. But it's quite, but in the Dvorah's poem as well, there's quite a sort of an understanding. It's not, oh, I'm really happy. There's understanding for her loss, which I think is very powerful.
Only another woman.
Yep.
Mother's always waiting for her children.
Yeah, except, and that's true, but this poem was written by Chaim Guri, by a man. So some men have got those tendency as well. Okay, I think we are coming to the end of our time. I hope that you enjoyed looking at the paintings and reading the poems, and I hope it enriched your understanding of the biblical stories, or maybe it challenged some of them, and maybe made you look at the text with slightly new eyes. So I would like, if anybody has any comments to share about what you felt about this journey. I don't know if there was anything in the chat, Bob, that you want to share with us.
No, I didn't have anything to chat. Everyone was very comfortable speaking aloud to you.
Good.
And expressing their opinions, which was even better than the chat. So I think that we all had an opportunity to contribute, and I guess using different artists and poems to reflect on different pieces of the Torah does add different dimensions to the literal word. So I think it was very enlightening, and then I anticipated that enlightenment when I knew you would be speaking, bringing these elements in. So I appreciated that, and I think our audience did the same as they began to think differently when they saw the different components. So, Yasher Koach, I think it was very well done and much appreciated.
Thank
There is
you, and I'd
one-
like to thank you all for sharing this journey with me.
You're
Well,
welcome.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
There
I
is
thought it
one
was-
comment in the chat. Thank you, Irit. It was very thought-provoking.
Yeah, I thought it was very
Thank
nice to have a cultural type of discussion with pictures and poems of stuff we normally just take for granted when we read the Torah.
Thank you. And Gloria and Bob have got my email, so if anybody wants to make any comments later on, feel free to be in touch.
And Irit, you said you have, if anyone wants a copy of the poems and the paintings,
Yeah,
please send
You've-
Bob an email. He can send you a link.
and there you'll have the Hebrew as well, because it hurts me not to have the Hebrew text when we deal with the poems, but
That's what I was going
That's
to
about it.
ask, if you could make the Hebrew available, so perfect.
it is
Yes,
available.
good.
Yeah.
Make sure we get that link out to everyone, and we'll put it again out in reflection and thanks, and a link so people can see the poems with the Hebrew and English along with the pictures. So I'm happy to make that happen to complement what you did.
Thank
I
you.
want to thank you and say, Eric, Lila Tov from London, as it's still evening yet here. We're at twilight, but for you, we thank you for your job well done. And Temple Israel appreciates your participation in our program, and you've strengthened it and enriched it, and we appreciate it. So thank you, Reed, for your help.
Thank you very much.
I would just like to say this is like an artist's midrash.
Right.
Exactly.
Yes, very nice. Thank you. I'm very appreciative.
We hope everyone enjoyed, and stay tuned for more programs that are coming up in our calendar. Just to let you know where we are. We're in May, of course, and I think next week, on next Thursday, week from today, this one at 7:30, Waltraub Unger is going to give a program on about de-stressing your life and how to live with it. So if you want to learn about how to de-stress and make a healthy body and a healthy mind, and next Thursday at 7:30, Waltraub Unger. So thank you again, and to everyone, have a lovely evening, lovely dinner, and thank you for your participation, Irit. It was a great joy to have you here, and Rabbi, thank you. Rabbi Reuben, thank you for helping recommend Irit to us, and we appreciate it.
Good evening and beteavon.
Okay. All right.
Love events.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you again.
Pleasure.